What we were discussing in the last class was we were talking about the factors affecting photosynthesis, right? We were at the last portion of the chapter. We have discussed the internal factors based on which, on which photosynthesis depends upon. Today we will be discussing about the external factors. So, we are left out with just a small portion of the lesson. Once we are completed with the lesson, what we can do is we can share the we can discuss the doubts of this chapter if you have any from the starting point, right? So, we can just discuss, but likha hisabe by in the form of note, we have a very small portion to write today, right? So, external factors boli heading kora. Last class, I think before discussing the factors, we have talked something about cardinal points. I think you all remember, no? Tinta bostu kotha patisilu, eta hol cardinal points. Sorry, law of minimum and law of limiting factor, right? Cardinal points at ki asile, tinta cardinal point asile. What are the three cardinal points? Minimum, optimum and maximum. What was the definition? Minimum, maximum, optimum. Definition ki asile? But what we understand, minimum is the point where the reaction starts. Optimum, the reaction is best at this point, and what is maximum? Beyond this point the reaction stops. So, these were the three cardinal points given by a scientist called as Sachs. Next we have discussed something called as law of limiting factor and law of minimum. Kune propose korisil, hetu bostu important asile, law of minimum kune disile? Liebig. And who gave the law of limiting factor? Blackman, right? Okay. So, external factors are first likha light. I think in the last class we have discussed chemiosmotic hypothesis also. Is the concept clear? So, very clear hoise ne kiba doubts ase. If at all we have doubts, after finishing this part we can just discuss if you want. So, we have completed internal factors, external factors heading kori pelai. Light. Students, can you hear me? Hello? Sorry. Students, shuna paisa ne? Okay. Please say. हाँ ডাৰ্ক ৰিয়েকশ্যনটো আকৌ এবাৰ এক্সপ্লেইন কৰিব লাগে ডাৰ্ক ৰিয়েকশ্যনৰ কোনটো পাৰ্ট এক্সপ্লেইন কৰিব লাগে ইজ ইট দ্য এণ্টায়াৰ ডাৰ্ক ৰিয়েকশ্যন দ্য 3 ডিফাৰেণ্ট টাইপছ নে এটা স্পেচিফিক Okay, so what we can do is we can finish this lesson first. Okay, I mean factors kini hai discuss koriso factors kini to basi eku iman mane we don't have much to write about it, right? So once we are done with the factors we can talk about the dark reaction again. Okay, just wait for this to get completed. Okay. If the red line is not clear, So we are talking about the external factors, and the first external factor is light. We know light has a big role in the process of photosynthesis. Karon light thakilehe photosynthesis process to hobo. When we are talking about light, we will be talking about light under 3 categories, right? I think you have heard something called as light intensity, light duration. Ebilak words to ami already huniswe. Apart from that, we have something called as the compensation point, right? So light compensation, light or logot affected ki compensation point. Now compensation point is a phenomenon that you need to understand. The first point is compensation point ki hoy, first hetu janibo laibo. The second point is it is not only light which is responsible to bring about a compensation point. Carbon dioxide can also bring a compensation point, and other factors can also bring a compensation point. Since we are talking about light, we will be talking about compensation point or light compensation point. ঠিক আছে, আমি যেটা carbon dioxide পড়িম তেতিয়া আমি কি পড়িম carbon dioxide compensation point. But before that, what is compensation point? By the definition itself, common idea paisu niki. Sometimes what happens in the cell, so if you are talking about a cell, in the same cell itself, 2 processes are simultaneously occurring. It is photosynthesis due to go ase or respiration hoy ase. What happens during the process of photosynthesis? We know that they will take in carbon dioxide and then they will release oxygen, and what happens in respiration is just the opposite. So inside the cell, sometimes what might happen, the photosynthesis of karne, the amount of oxygen that is evolved is taken in by the cell by the process of respiration, and these gases keeps on revolving in a cycle in the cell itself, right? So photosynthesis, we know that oxygen gets evolved, a respiration on ki hoy oxygen loy. It does not matter where it is taking the oxygen from. It's not necessary that it has to take it from the atmosphere itself. If it is sufficiently available in the cell, then it can take it from the cell also, right? So if at a point enukwa eta jodi situation hoy jot niki photosynthesis is equal to respiration, that point is something called as the compensation point. And who is responsible to bring about compensation point? Many factors like temperature, light, carbon dioxide, etc. Kiba eta amount of light porile eta cellot eta amount of light porile ketiaba enukwa hobo pare je photosynthesis or respiration eke saman hobo pare, right? Kiba eta carbon dioxide or concentration or karone enukwa hobo pare je cell to photosynthesis or respiration or rate to eke saman hobo pare. So at whatever might be the factor, any factor might be responsible for bringing about a compensation point. What is compensation point? It is a point where the rate of respiration and the rate of photosynthesis is equal. Now, if in a cell, if this is a situation that occurs, tetiyahale ki hobo? The first point that we talk about is exchange of gas. Photosynthesis or ki hoy? Gaseous exchange. Respiration or to ki hoy? Gaseous exchange. But if a cell is facing compensation point, gaseous exchange hobo ne no hoy? Gaseous exchange mane ki? We are talking about the exchange between the cell and the atmosphere. You take it from the atmosphere, right, and you give back to the atmosphere. That is what is called as gaseous exchange. Carbon dioxide ko pra lobo, atmosphere pra lobo, cell or, right? Thik teneke oxygen ko pra lobo, atmosphere pra lobo, ako carbon dioxide ko pra. If you are talking about photosynthesis, then carbon dioxide will be taken in from the atmosphere, oxygen produce koribo, oxygen to ako release koribo. If you are talking about respiration, oxygen to atmosphere pra lobo, carbon dioxide produce koribo, carbon dioxide to release koribo into the atmosphere, and this is what is called as gaseous exchange. If this is a condition that is occurring in the cell, the first point to be remembered is gaseous exchange will not take place. Exchange keneke koribo? Photosynthesis jiman oxygen produce korise gutekhini to cell e accept kori loise, atmosphere ne kiba gusi goise niki? Joato nai? Are you understanding? So first, what is compensation point? A point at which the rate of photosynthesis and the rate of respiration becomes equal. Who is responsible for bringing a compensation point? Any factor like light, temperature, carbon dioxide could be responsible for bringing a compensation point of the cell. Third, what will happen if the point or if a cell reaches compensation point? Certain things will happen. Ki hobo? First to ami gom palu je gaseous exchange no hobo. Second, food production hobo jalo? Food production no hobo. Keneke hobo swa? Food production to hobo nware no, gote cycle to block hoy gol no, oxygen to ako ki hobo laibo? It should come out and the reaction should take place, etc., etc., right? So everything will come to a halt, right? So compensation point or, okay, this is another graph just to explain a little more from examination point of view. Ebilak bostu iman questions aha nai, ঠিক আছে maximum question কি আহিব পাৰে যে what is compensation point and what are the factors that are responsible and what happens when a cell attains compensation point, right? So this graph talks about what we are talking about two graph no etu eta the blue color and the black color. Black to ki indicate korise rate of photosynthesis as the time of the day or as light keeps on increasing, the rate of photosynthesis keeps on increasing, we know this, right? But not necessarily the infinite time or karone to increase no kore. বস্তুটো বুজি পাইছা নাই? If you are talking about photosynthesis and light, what is the relation? Suppose we are talking about a graph like this. This is light and this is the rate of photosynthesis. As light increases, photosynthesis increases. Again you increase the light, photosynthesis will increase. So is it like this that the graph will keep on going like this? Eneke niki? Nohoy, ketia olop deri pisot ki hobo? Right? Why? Because some other factors will become limiting. I think we have discussed that limiting factor discuss korisu je light pai asu maybe some other factor might become limiting and so the graph does not go like this, right? So ultimately ki hoy postu to ahi komi jabo, right? In the same cell itself respiration to choli ase, right? So we have a point where the rate of respiration and the rate of photosynthesis becomes equal and this point is called as compensation point. What is seen is in a cell generally compensation point is achieved in the morning and in the evening hours, right? Dinor bhitor compensation point iman easily achievable nohoy. It is generally in the early morning, not early exactly aro 8 ta bajat as the process starts no okoman deri lagibo. So morning aru evening or homoyot he cell to ami ki dekha pao compensation point dekha pao. Is the point clear? Nothing to learn about it, it's just the way to understand. What is compensation point? When the two graphs meet, which two graphs are we talking about? The rate of respiration and the rate of photosynthesis. Is this point clear? Right? So below the graph we'll write sorry. এইটো নে এইটো carbohydrate balance মানে the amount of food they are preparing. Concept to বুজি পাইছা নে? Okay. তলত লিখি থাকিবা because of compensation point what happens? So if a cell attains compensation point, তেতিয়াহলে কি হ'ব? The growth will ultimately stop. Next লিখা Okay, as we have discussed, compensation point we understood. Who is responsible to bring about the compensation point? Various factors are responsible to bring about compensation point. How many factors, to be precise? 3 factors brings about compensation point. The first one is light compensation point. What is light compensation point? Light, eta particular light intensity porile cell to ki hobo compensation point achieve korbo. Kiman khini light porile compensation point ahibo, that is what is called as light compensation point. At what light intensity or maybe at what light duration the rate of photosynthesis will become equal to the rate of respiration. So, that is what is called as light compensation point. Amade compensation point to kune anise? Light e anise. At a particular amount of light porile cell to ki hobo photosynthesis or respiration rate to eke homan hobo. That is what is called as light compensation point. Is the point clear? You don't have to define it separately as to what is light compensation point, right? Compensation point to ami buji paisu duita process eke homan hobo lagibo. Ketia hobo? Who is responsible? Factors are responsible. What are the factors? The first one is light. Kiba eta amount of light porile eta cellot rate of respiration and photosynthesis becomes equal, and that is what is called as light compensation point. Right? So, definition to iman important nohoy. Etor pra question ahise. Light compensation point is high for heliophytes and low for sciophytes. The first thing that we need to know is what is a heliophyte and what is a sciophyte. Sciophyte is something that we have already discussed. Sciophyte ki asile? Remember, we have talked about this word during bryophytes. Bryophytes bilakok ki boli koisilu? Sciophytes boli koisilu. What is sciophytes? Shade loving plants are called as sciophytes, and heliophytes ki asile? Sun loving plants are called as heliophytes, right? Bahut rodot goji ase ne sad goji ase. Junbilak sad goje, that shade loving plants, no? These are called as sciophytes. We have written certain informations about a sciophyte. Whenever a plant is a sciophyte, when will the plant consider itself a sciophyte? When light to kom ke pore. Andhar ba sa jegat jun black plants hoy tak ami ki boli kom sciophyte. Jehetu andhar hoi thake, sa hoi thake. So, what they have is they will have a large surface area of the leaves. They will try to extend their leaves so that they can take in the light. Is the point understood? Sciophytes bilakor surface area leaves or ki okay. So, sciophytes bilakor surface area kiho karone dangor kore thake? Is it understood? Question might be asked from this point, it could be asked from this point also, right? Large surface area of a leaf is a characteristic of heliophytes and sciophytes. It's a character of sciophytes, because we know if we are talking about a tree is junki ki area? Shade, right? So, sun to yat ase. So, if this is the shade area, no, yate junbilak plants grow kore, tahate leaves bilak dangor hole he tahate ei sunlight to poribo. Right? That is the reason why they will have a large surface area. So, sciophytes or leaves bilak kenekwa hoy, surface area besi hoy. And when the surface area is big, obviously quantosome would be more. What is quantosome? Photosynthetic unit is called as a quantosome. What is photosynthetic unit? The number of pigments that were responsible to take in the light and start the process of photosynthesis. Tak ami ki boli koisilu? Quantosome. He pigment or group to ami ki koisilu? Quantosome. What is one quantosome consist of? Remember, we have talked about 230 chlorophyll molecules and necessary pigments, right? Hey collection to kami ki boli koisilu? Quantosome. Hey quantosome ki kore? They will take in the light and start photosynthesis. So, if the surface area is more, obviously the pigments would be more, right? Quantosome basike thakibo, surface area basike thakibo, so that they can take in the light and start photosynthesis. So, sciophytes or ekhini point ami janibo lagibo. First, what is a sciophyte? Shade loving plant. Second, they will have large surface area and larger number of quantosome. Is the point clear? Our rate pointer pra hai high for heliophytes ne low for heliophytes. It's high for heliophytes and low for sciophytes. So, this was the first factor responsible. Next, likha number Okay, light compensation point was A. So, temperature compensation point, the amount of temperature required to bring the rate of photosynthesis equal to the rate of respiration is called as temperature compensation point, right. If you are talking about temperature compensation point, we are talking about the different types of plants, C4, C3 and CAM plants. So, it is high for C4 and CAM plants and low for C3 plants. What is the reason behind? Kihor karne? C4 plants compensation point hobo lagile temperature besi lagibo. C3 plants compensation point ahibo lagile kom temperature te hobo. What is the reason? If you remember, we have already talked about a word called as tropical. Remember? And in case of CAM plants, we have talked something called as a xerophyte. Right? Generally, xerophytes, like if you are talking about a cactus could grow in a very in an area with high temperature. So, tahate already temperature basically pai. So, aru basic temperature thakilehe compensation point ahibo. That is the reason why we are writing as high for C4 and CAM plants. But if you are talking about C3 plants, a normal type of plants that generally grow in cold climate, right. So, junবিলাক plants cold climate or grow kore, tahatar okoman temperature increase hole ki hoy jabo compensation point to achieve hobo. কিন্তু যোনবিলাক plants already বেছি temperature grow কৰিছে তাহাতক আৰু বেছি temperature লাগিব compensation point to achieve কৰিবলে. Is the point clear? Right? What is the reason behind? Generally the question is not asked on that. Question to khali high ne low hetu upor ami stress dim from MCQ point of view. Right? So the question directly that is asked is high for C4 ne low for C4, low for C3 ne high for C3. Right? And if you want so the first one was light, the second is temperature, and the third factor which is responsible for bringing a compensation point in the cell is carbon dioxide. We are talking about the external factors affecting photosynthesis, right? And the first factor that we are discussing is light. When we talk about light, we have to talk about three categories of light or three sections of light that affects photosynthesis. First, key porilu ami light compensation point. Next is something called as light intensity, and the third is called as light duration. Under these three headings, we need to talk about the effect of light in photosynthesis, right? So first ami ki porilu compensation point, light and the role of light in bringing about a compensation point. So we have first understood what is a compensation point, whether both the process it becomes equal, and if both the process becomes equal, then gradually the growth stops. Why? Exchange of gas na thake, right? Net productivity zero hoi jay, aru as a result ki hoy, the growth stops, right? That is what is called as compensation point. If you are talking about the role of light in bringing the compensation point, the different plants will have its own requirement to bring about a compensation point. It could be high for certain plants, it would be low for certain plants. As far as plants are concerned, we have talked under two categories. One is called as the heliophytes and other is called as the sciophyte, right? So, hekhini ami points porilu. Next, talking about temperature, high and low again, and the third is carbon dioxide. Normally, naturally attained nokore, kintu by experimental purpose we can do that. We can bring a cell into a compensation point and ultimately we can stop the growth also. So, C3 plant analog jodi ami compensation point ole anibo lage, tetia hole the high amount of carbon dioxide would be required, and jodi C4 plant of compensation point or anibo lage, low amount of carbon dioxide would be required. What is the reason behind? We have not written the reason because the reason is not important also from your point of view. Reason ki ho karone, the most important reason is photorespiration. C3 plants out ki hoy photorespiration hoy, C4 plants are to photorespiration no hoy, right? So, he karone ki lage je ama, okay, reason kyo hoy, ki hoy, explanation nahe. So, let's not get confused, just remember this 2 point, high and low, right? Okay, so this was the first one, compensation point. Next likha, number 2, light intensity. Light or tinta section, first light compensation, second light intensity, third light duration. write it down. This is again the definition of light compensation point. Since we are talking about light, so we have talked about light compensation point. So a particular intensity of light is responsible to bring about the compensation point. Right. Since we are talking about light, aru eta bostu likhibo laibo. Remember the word solarization. We have talked about accessory pigments, no? And what was the most important function of accessory pigments? Important pigment ki chlorophyll, accessory pigments ki baki bilak, no? Carotene, xanthophylls, etc., etc. What is the most important function of accessory pigment? Protection. Car protection. Chlorophyll, or if it is not protected, what will happen? The solarization effect will destroy the chlorophyll molecule. Right? So something that is related with light. So jehetu light or lokot related, we have to talk about this process. Solarization or karne kun responsible? Photo intensity or photo oxidation. What is the two process? We'll just write a definition for that. Jehetu light kori asu, so we are talking about this. So light or logot, we have to talk about solarization. Solarization kune ahane, photo inhibition. What we understand by photo inhibition? Inhibition of what? Inhibition of photosynthesis, right? কেতিয়া ইনহিবিট কৰে যেতিয়া ষ্টমাটাটো বন্ধ হৈ যায় ষ্টমাটা কেতিয়া বন্ধ হৈ যায় যেতিয়া ট্ৰান্সপিৰেশ্যন ৰেটটো বেছি হৈ যায় right because loss of water or huge amount of loss would always make the cell less hydrated and jetia pani kom thakibo the stomata automatically ki hobo it will close down if the stomata closes down photosynthesis will also decrease or it will stop and this is what is called as photoinhibition. Other two terms understood now, photooxidation or photoinhibition. Who is responsible? Obviously photo what to assess, obviously light is responsible, and so under the category of light we are talking about photooxidation and photoinhibition. I think this is also a point that we have discussed with experiments and all those stuffs, right? What is visible light? We understand PAR, I think we remember. 400 to 700 nm, that range is called as PAR. Maximum plants photosynthesis koribo lagile kuntu wavelength of light absorb kore, it is the PAR range 400 to 700, right. So that is what is called as a visible light, right. So amongst the visible light, if you are going to break the light into different wavelengths, what we see maximum photosynthesis in red light. I think you remember that absorption spectrum and action spectrum, no, graph bilak korisu. So this is from that point itself, right. So this was all the information about the first factor, that is light that affects photosynthesis. So under the category of light, ami tinta bostu porhilo, eta hol light compensation point, eta hol light duration or intensity, and next is light quality, right. Next we'll go to the next factor, that is temperature. Is this over? Okay. Next likhiba temperature. So if you are talking about temperature, बहुत कम temperature photosynthesis does not start. What is the reason? Inactivation of enzymes. बहुत बेसी temperature photosynthesis stops. What is the reason? Denaturation of enzymes, right? बहुत कम temperature तो न होबो, बहुत बेसी temperature तो न होबो in general condition, but obviously we will have certain types of exceptions, right? Exceptions are the 4 points that we have written. Right. So, normally inactivation of enzymes means the enzymes that were responsible to start that process will not work. Denaturation of enzymes means the enzymes will break down, right? That is what is called as denaturation, right? Basic temperature ki hoy proteins bilak bhangi jay, enzymes bilak bhangi jay. That is what is called as denaturation, right? So, basic holeo na hobo, kom holeo na hobo. So, if you are talking about C4 plants, normally if this is the range, C4 we know they already grow in a high temperature, so slightly more. Generally above 55 photosynthesis stops because of this reason. Most of the plants A2 and some of the exceptions. Kisuman ki hoy very cold to hoy, for example lichens and conifers, as the name suggests we know the meaning of lichen and conifer. Certain succulents, whenever we talk about succulents, I think you remember we have talked about CAM plants, right? And there are certain type of algae who will start the photosynthesis or do photosynthesis even at 75 degrees Celsius. So, this was the second factor. Next, we will go for the third one. It was a whole. Next, likhiba carbon dioxide. It whole likhi. When we were talking about the requirements for photosynthesis, carbon dioxide was one of the requirements, and at that time we have talked about the amount that is present in the atmosphere. So, this is something that the question is always asked about. So, percentage to ami janibo lagibo. So, we know plants will obviously require carbon dioxide to do photosynthesis, but they will always have a limit. Lagat ke besi jodi carbon dioxide loy, it will become toxic and ultimately it will hamper the whole process. Nothing to explain in carbon dioxide. Next, likhiba oxygen. What is the relation between oxygen and photosynthesis? We have already discussed about this before. Oxygen and photosynthesis relation ki hobo? Jetake carbon dioxide and photosynthesis, we have talked about 2 points. Obviously, to start the process, carbon dioxide lagibo, kintu basically hole ki hobo? Toxic hoy jabo, right? What is the relation between oxygen and photosynthesis? Ki hobo oxygen? Cellot besi oxygen hole ki hobo? So, পঢ়ালো মিললো finish নেকি? Very good. Photorespiration হ'ব. So, ultimately, যদি photorespiration হয়, তেতিয়াহ'লে photosynthesis process to hamper কৰিব. Right? And another point is, actually, as far as explanation is concerned, it's almost the same thing. In the first class itself, we have written something called as Warburg's effect. প্ৰথম introductory class যেতিয়া আছিল ন, আমি কিছুমান informations লিখিছিলোঁ, তাত আমি Warburg effect বুলিও এটা বস্তু লিখিছোঁ. Okay. Likha, this is number 4. 4, no? 4 or 3? 4. Second line to choose kora. It is in C4. Correct? Why? Again the same answer, no photorespiration. If this is over, the fifth factor would be water. What is, okay, what is Warburg's effect? Monot rakhiba. Over. Okay, water and photosynthesis. Up to the portion that we had discussed up till now, what do you remember? Role of water in photosynthesis. Water. Very good. It is the source of electrons and protons in photosynthesis, right? And it is water who is responsible for the evolution of oxygen in photosynthesis. Kuntu photosynthesis, the normal type of photosynthesis that we see in case of plants. In case of bacterial photosynthesis, oxygen evolution no hoy karon tat water accept no kore, right? Next is minerals. Okay, talking about minerals, the first that we are writing is Mg. Mg ki asile structural component of dash chlorophyll. Synthesis of chlorophyll. If we talk about Mn and Cl, Mn and Cl responsible for or was a part of dash complex. Remember something called as water oxidizing complex, photolysis of water? Next, लिखे about pollutants. So, what would be the role of pollutants and photosynthesis? Junto area pollution besi hobo, tat photosynthesis rate to hamper koribo ne nokore. Koribo, so obviously it will decrease, right? One basic thing that we talk about is accumulation of dust on the leaves. Jeta leaves or dust accumulate koribo, stomatal pores bilak bond hobo, photosynthesis komi jabo, right? Next is inhibitors, certain chemical compounds which on applied to the plants will decrease the process of photosynthesis are called as inhibitors. So, some of the names of the inhibitors you need to remember. Inhibitor is a part that we are going to talk about in respiration also. Certain chemicals responsible for inhibiting the process of photosynthesis and certain chemicals responsible for inhibiting the process of photosynthesis, respiration and photosynthesis. So, question 2 keneke ahe, identify the photosynthetic inhibitor, identify the respiratory inhibitor. So, inhibitors are naam khini ami janibo lagibo, right? Not all, few of them. So, as I said, inhibitor is something that we have to talk about in during respiration also. So, whenever you hear the word inhibitor, we know that these are certain chemicals that would stop the reaction, right? Keneke stop korise, kunto step stop korise, you have to be precise. Respiration also we'll be talking about some types of inhibitors. Tar bhitorot one of the common inhibitor is cyanide. I think you have, everyone has heard about cyanide, no? Cyanide khale ki hoy manu to hunkale mori jay, no? Actually more kyo respiration process to bondho kori diye. So respiration bondho kori dise boli kole to nohobo, you have to know the proper way also. It is the flow of electron that it gets stops, right? So electron movement from a particular area to the particular area bondho kori diye aru he karone as a result instant death hoy jay. So similarly, if you are talking about inhibitors bilaki ki kore electron movement stop kore. Even in case of photosynthesis also, they will stop the inhibitor, I mean they will stop the electron movement. Electron movement ami kot porhisilo, light reaction of cyclic or non-cyclic of the pathway of electrons, I think we have read, right? So what do the inhibitor do? It will stop the flow between 680 and PQ, মানে নন সাইক্লিকৰ ইলেক্ট্ৰন মুভমেণ্টটোৱে ষ্টপ কৰি দিব আৰু নন সাইক্লিকে যদি বন্ধ কৰি দিয়ে ফটোচিনথেসিসটো অবভিয়াসলি নহ'ব ৰাইট নেক্সট ইজ টকিং এবাউট দিস is another word that you need to remember generally আমি inhibit কোনবিলাক plants কৰিম যোনবিলাক plants আমাক নালাগে right so as what herbicide or as a weedicide we use certain types of chemicals which could be considered as inhibitors for photosynthesis right so these were all the factors that affects photosynthesis or the external factors that affected photosynthesis so yaar bhitor question generally kihor upor ahise DCMU sum CMU sum pen first 3 and this one also bromosil right inhibitor out of everything most common DCMU right and these 3 points to পঢ়িবই লাগিব so since we have already done the internal factors this brings an end to the chapter just see if you have any doubts up till here or up till the portion that we have discussed in the class today Aji class clear hoise na so okay then I think that's all